Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, the weekly Q&A show where you ask me questions and I answer them. First of all, Devil May Cry 5 has been a great treat. I've been having a lot of fun with it, so if you're watching this now and you're curious about Devil May Cry 5, I'm actually working on a Hell and Hell playthrough right now. It's the final difficulty in which the enemies are set to the Son of Sparta level of difficulty, but if you take any hits, you lose a life. You get 4 lives in one level, and if you lose all of them, you go back to the beginning of the level. You don't just go back to the last checkpoint, you go back to the beginning. So I'm working on that, only a few stages in, so be sure to stop by the stream and check that out. We will be doing some videos here on YouTube. I don't want to do any like combo tech, anything like that, because I'm nothing compared to some of those crazy awesome tech people. That's his name, I think it's like Dungaturi or something like that. Yeah, I ain't one of those. Another thing is, the day I'm recording this is actually a really tough day for me, so I'm glad that Devil May Cry 5 actually is lifting my spirits, on top of this whole trip to Japan. It was a year ago, well, it's Sunday. I'm recording this on Sunday for Monday. On the Sunday, it's been officially a year since I lost my father. March 10th of last year was when we lost him. We went MIA, and I feel like thanks to the channel, thanks to all of you, thanks to my support here at home with my girlfriend, of course my cat, who I thought was in here and apparently isn't, and of course with the awesome news with the FanFest coming up with the trip, I've had a lot to occupy my mind. So it's been an easier first year than I thought. I got some of my tears out of the way. So thank you all of you for supporting me for the last year. I know I would have loved to have told my dad about the last year of everything, but I know he knows. He knows deep down. So thanks, Dad. Glad that I'm going to assume that you've given me good fortunes this month to make up for the fact that it otherwise would have been as tough as it is. So hopefully you're doing that for the rest of the family as well. So now that I've gotten the more emotional thing out of the way, which I got through with relative ease thanks to how comfortable I actually was with this month overall. We have our Patreon sponsors to thank. I'm not going to beat around the bush. You guys know how it works. They support us through #demonetized. And we shout them out every week on Mondays, and some of them on State of the Realm. We have our Patrons of Light, of course, Kuja Cross on Genova and Kurenai Oni, both of which you have been massive supporters, gone above and beyond over the last over a year at this point. So thank you to both of them. They've had screenshots on the screen. You know the deal by now if you've been watching Mondays every week. We also have a ton of other names, and I'm actually going to drag those over here so I can read them a little bit easier. Alright, so starting off with our standard sponsors, we have Kromgar Holzborg Sin of Gilgamesh, Kevin, Wabutalia, Alma Elma, Dark Lumina from Genova, Marianne, Ramil Gaming, Sabo Empire, Mizra, Red Wings of the Baron FC from Zalero, Sites Orion Shiva, Sid Helland of Gilgamesh, Afro Ninja from Malboro, Cheesecat from Leviathan, Lat Lame Weave, Astronomy of Cerberus, Fafarian, Rendell, Stevie Rex, and Neon. We have our elite sponsors. We have Ravik, Card Drakens from Fanfrit, Sigurd Drake from Balmung, Edgefair on Ultros, Jerica, Emma, Narek of Clan Vizsla, Chris Suzuki, Crazy Meter from Midgar, Ride Juventus from Cactar, Carol, Ray, Senchi, Shadowlink on Tonberry, Damasuko from Genova, Lamillion, Ella, Migger, Summer, Return the Fennel Family, Johnny Yatia, Kifka and the Great Eagles on Exodus, Katayoshi from Kujata, Skiasophony from Ragnarok, Renlayer, West Lost the Purple Warrior, Adric Red Steel on Exodus, Lexi Valentine, Mantaran, the Revisive Sea from Zodiac, Sour Cream and Tribes from Genova, Renoa Chikara, Guish Falfern of Siren, Phoenix Down of Sion Goblin, and Saren from Zodiac. Finally, we have our premium sponsors for Mondays with Mr. Happy. We have Vapatiama from Diablo, Shadow Ari of Brynhildr, Zero Fire of Coral, Alchemy, Shinka, Casual Heroes FC on Midgard, Sarma, Touchdock on Hyperion, Kanazuki from Genova, U Starla on Coral, Sothal, Sarah Frost from Behemoth, Holy Tabasco, Crass 015, Serenity FC on Ultros, Cat Kazuma, Ignis Fairgun from Excalibur, Valestra of Fanfrit, Not Quarters from Excalibur, Corvus Moonscar, Private Mikey, Nana Karisami, Rudy Rudiger, Killer Hackman, Roll Jr., and Kiltastic Jones. So thank you to everyone who's been a massive supporter on Patreon to help combat #demonetized. With that, I expect this video to look a little weirder. I'm using the YouTube comment section now for questions again. This means a couple of things. One, it does mean that questions will be missed if I've answered a question a lot recently in recent Mondays with Mr. Happy, or it's just something maybe I'm tired of answering because I've answered it enough times at this point over my entire history. There's a chance I don't take the question. So I will be vetting each individual question. So anything you see on the screen, I've read and approved pretty much. And if you're looking to ask questions, we're using the YouTube comment section for now until I have the time or the energy at the very least to work on getting a proper forum and website for myself up in the future. So with that, let's get started. Question number 1 comes from Foxy Mama. Hey, Mr. Happy, or hey, Haps, I just changed the first 2 words. I've got a question. Final Fantasy XIV seems to be responsible for keeping Square Enix afloat in recent years. I don't think they're putting enough money back into the game. I say this because every time we want a systematic change, they blame it on bad server infrastructure or spaghetti code. Don't you think that 14 generates enough revenue for some quality of life changes? Shouldn't they actually fix some of these things instead of acting like they're there forever? What are your thoughts? If you need examples, look no further than crossover messaging, character creator, hairstyles, messaging all instances. I guarantee the new world visit system will have a million limits limitations. So first of all, we have cross-server messaging. Granted, it could be better. Character creator, they've said, is more of a thing they want to actually add in-game ways to customize your character, because those of us who already have characters would have to spend money in order to change that. They have said that if they ever revisited graphics or the engine, they would also revisit the character creator as well. Hairstyles, one of the things they add in lieu of adding stuff to the character creator is hairstyles, and we get plenty of those. Messages while in instances, that's actually an anti-harassment thing. They've listed this since years ago. That has nothing to do with a server limitation. That's strictly because they don't want people harassing you while you're in a dungeon. Now, to be fair, I think we've outlived that, and I think we could do away with that limitation, assuming there are no actual technical limitations for it. And New World Visit System has limitations. There's actually the World Visit System. We already know what the limitations are on it, and they're fairly forgiving. Just can't like put items up for sale, or you can't be an NFC on another server. And that has nothing to do with spaghetti code or infrastructure. So the things you've given me as a list are not the things I think of when I think of, you know, oh, because of server limitations. I think of things like, you know, more inventory, like the tackle box that's long been talked about, or other things that we have in the game that have been listed as, well, we could do that, but it would be a pretty big thing. Now, to talk about 14 in terms of it being responsible for keeping Square Enix afloat, it's not responsible for keeping them afloat. It was responsible for a wave of change that happened in the company. We heard this in the NoClip documentary for 1.0, where the company had focus in all the wrong places. And it's not the first time, especially when you look all the way back to the Spirits Within movie, which caused them massive financial issues as well, considering how poorly it did. Now, Final Fantasy XIV sparked a wave of change in Square Enix as a company, where they were focused on quality products. Now, a lot of people have said things such as Final Fantasy 15 or, you know, all these mobile games. First of all, the mobile games make so much money. Mobile games probably make more money per year in terms of revenue than Final Fantasy XIV does in a given year. Now, granted, I don't have the numbers to back that up, but I do know that Final Fantasy XV: A New Empire, a game that was lauded as a complete sham in terms of the company handing out the rights to Final Fantasy XV to another company to make a mega cash grab mobile game, makes over $300 million a year. And that's not to include the fact you have Brave Exvius, Mobius, Record Keeper, you have all the various Japan-only ones. In fact, an Octopath one was just announced for Japan not too long ago. So it's hardly responsible for keeping them afloat. As for that, that's not the only thing. Final Fantasy XIV actually has a huge development team against what some people think. It's probably the largest one in the industry, but the majority of them are art and design and music and things like that. It's not as simple as just putting more money into it. You need to also make sure you're hiring qualified individuals. It's why very often at fan festivals and at various live letters, if something comes up where Yoshi P can plug, please apply for jobs here, it's probably because they have budget to hire, but they haven't found people who actively qualify for the things that they need yet. Now, I will say you're not entirely unfounded, because 1.0 was a large part of building 2.0. 2.0 was built in under 3 years, and a lot of it did carry over stuff from 1.0 that we would call spaghetti code. It's why we have some insanely silly things that can't be done to this day, like I'd imagine staying on mounts while we actually interact with NPCs. But that being said, I think they are getting to those things. We've seen so many quality of life changes over the years. These things are things that are slower to come. I have a feeling that one day we will be seeing a lot of things change in regards to exactly the things that you mentioned, even if they may not be in the most timely of manner, because they're more focused on newer, more exciting things, and less about things that have been the way they are and have functioned fine the way that they are up to this point. All right, next question. Hey, Happy, long-time watcher and first-time asker, so I have a bonus of a next-tier raid food that lasts for 2 hours per use. Oh, you're going above and beyond, because it's normally 90 minutes with just that one stack. For my question, I was wondering how you break into more hardcore endgame. I've been raiding with a static for almost 8 months, and when I started, I would have put myself on the casual side of mid-core, like 2-3 nights per week for about 3 hours each. While working with them, my performance has reached the beginning tiers of hardcore, starting to get like 90% parses and current Savage content. Now that I'm at that point, I've noticed a lot of players in this bucket get super salty at the slightest mistake, like missing 2 scorns. I still have time restraints in my real life that I can dedicate to a ton of, so I can dedicate a ton of time to optimize fighting. I feel like you meant to say can't, because if you had restraints, you wouldn't be able to do that. In your opinion, should I stick it out for Shadowbringers launch, or would it be best to leave and join a different mid-core static? So missing scorns is not something that I as someone who's raided with very hardcore players, you know, players who have gone on to be world first. I've competed in world prog myself, in server first prog as well. I'll never have it because the world first groups are on the same server as the server first. We're just trying to prog really quick. Let's call it that. I don't see people get salty over missing scorns, and I find that the people who are saltiest over performance like gaps, and I call them that because they're not poor performances, they're gaps where this could be improved. If they're getting salty over it, and I'm just going to take your interpretation of it, then it's very different, because I find that people who are most obsessed with making fun of the meta, with being super salty about the way things play, are not the people who are performing at the highest level. You know, the majority of people who are performing at the highest level, they do, you know, hate missing those things. They do want to see those things improve. They do want to see, but they're not salty about it. They want to improve. That's the focus of their gameplay. Or maybe they just want to win. I'm one of those players who wants to win above all else. So it's kind of weird, because I think you might be in an okay static if they're enabling you and your personal skill is allowing you to get parses of that caliber. You could do whatever you want in terms of rating, because you now have what I call the portfolio, which means, you know, when you apply to a static, you have the portfolio to say, hey, these are what my parses look like. This is what our kill times look like. These are, you know, they can look at all the various things. You have something to prove your value. So it's just a matter of how comfortable do you feel? I think with only 9 hours a week, you need a very specific, assuming that you would want to stick to about the same amount of time per week, you need a very specific hardcore group, because hardcore can come in two different values. It can come in the amount of time dedicated. It could come in the type of content you're conquering, such as ultimate. If your goal is to get ultimate done, you could totally do it with a schedule like that. But if you're looking to get into server first, or, you know, a high, like top 10 world clear status, you are going to need more available time. But all you would simply have to do is have the available time, have the drive to do it, and apply. Because if you have this kind of numbers and you have that dedication to actually get to that next level, you've already ticked all the boxes. And at this point, it's only your decision whether or not you want to go out there and search for that hardcore static. All right, our next question comes from Brad. Hey, Habs, been a while since I asked any questions, so have two, if you have time, of course. Piggybacking off the question about raises from last week, do you think that normal modes in 24-man should have an enrage of sorts? It always seems a bit backwards that fights like Thunder God Sid eventually boil down to keep throwing bodies at him till we win, barring one or two mechanics. I recall Death Gaze actually did this back in Dunscape, but he's been the exception rather than the rule. Thoughts? Second question is, what are your thoughts about LB cheesing, and should the LB generation be changed to a fixed increase to prevent things like intentionally eating flamethrowers in 011 Savage, taking off your gear beforehand to start at critical HP, and the tank LB hilarity of, oh my goodness, of 012. So first I'll take this first question, since it's actually on screen and I didn't put the other one on screen as I was reading it. I feel like it's good to put enrages in more casual content, like the 8-mans, like the 24-mans outside of Savage and Ultimate, because you need to teach people that those things exist. You know, one thing Final Fantasy XIV has not improved on as much as I would have liked is educating players. There's so much information in the game, and yes, they will point you to where you need to go to learn it, but they pretty much leave it all in your hands at that point. Now, normally that's fine. For someone like me, that's fine. For your average player, it's probably not adequate enough. Now, players know there's such a thing as an enrage. You know, most people aren't oblivious to that. But getting people used to the concept of perform at this level or lose is something that you kind of need to understand going into actual Savage content. And it's one of those things that you could do with, you could do without, but I'm on the side of do with. Yeah, Death Gaze is a perfect example. Even soft enrages, actually. I prefer soft enrages in terms of, you know, slowly over the fight. You know, you don't have as much space to work with. You don't have as much time left as you might think. I think back to things like Heroic Ragnaros, where he gradually, you know, you gradually can't deal with the arena, or Lady Sinestra back in Cataclysm, both, I guess, examples from Cataclysm, where you had to just drop puddles, and gradually they would take up more of the arena than you could handle. Things like that are good. I feel like that kind of spatial awareness is important, and as is the idea of letting people know enrages exist. As for the second question about LB cheesing, LB cheesing is rough, because it's one of those things that so few people do that changing it seems kind of meh. If you regulate LB generation, meaning regardless of party composition, your LB generates regularly, the main reason that limitation is even there in the first place is because of what's it called? They were afraid people would just stack jobs, stack roles. People used to, and that's why they made it so severe as it is. And then on top of that, you know, you lose some of the interesting things. I look back to like my Ultimate fights, for example, and us playing around LB generation was a massive thing that helped us. You know, we got an extra LB2 on our eventual kill of Uwu, our first one. And then I look at things like my almost world third for A3 Savage, so close. I ended up being world sixth, but at least it was a pre-weapon clear. We had a whole extra LB2 in that fight because of unintentional LB generation. You know, we just barely mitigated a few things and ended up with a whole extra LB2. We lost with less than 1,000 health left on the boss because of 2 deaths at the very end. But if not for that LB2, we probably would have been off by another several tens of thousands of damage. So it's just crazy to think about how beneficial LB generation as it has been to the raid scene. And it's such a specific thing to play around that I think when you aim for it intelligently, it seems fair. I think if anything, the amount of LB generated off the tank LBs in particular might be the thing to look at. If you're committing to using a tank LB3, that form of mitigation probably shouldn't count towards the insane amounts of LB generation you get back, or at least it should be cut to some degree. We've seen it, especially with O12. You can practically generate a third LB back after using the tank LB3. It's insane. So I might recommend targeting that exact thing, but I don't want to hurt the idea of being rewarded limit break for surviving mechanics with strictly shields such as Divine Veil, Eloquium Suckers, etc., etc. Because that's something that always feels really good when you see that bar tick up in those situations. Alright, next question. Hi, Mr. Happy. New viewer here. Hello! Me and my wife just recently started playing Final Fantasy XIV, but I've been playing for about 2 months now, and I'm fully done with Stormblood, which is overall a great story, and we both fell in love with the game. Now for my question, do you think the Trust will be a good way for someone to learn to tank? I'm totally new to MMOs, a big Final Fantasy VIII fan, and I need to learn to tank so I can play Gunbreaker. So first of all, don't wait for Trusts to start learning how to tank. You have several months before the expansion comes out. You have your wife with you, so she can help you along the way. She can act as one party member to maybe calm the nerves a little bit. But you have squadrons right now. Squadrons are a little bit interesting because you still need to tell them to engage, disengage, you know, they have to follow your lead. And being a tank on those can be a little risky because the healer sometimes likes the DPS a little too much. It's one of those. And I guess that could be kind of tough, but I wouldn't wait for Gunbreaker to come out and use Trusts. Because don't forget, Gunbreaker goes from level 60 to 70 before you'll even ever see Trusts, because Trusts are, as they've set up to this point, strictly for Shadowbringers content, specifically the dungeon, so you can get through the story. So I would say don't wait. While yes, they might be an okay way to learn, you're never... Trusts aren't going to teach you how to know when to have tank stance on or when to have your DPS stance on. Those aren't going to teach you, you know, how to tank swap. Those aren't going to teach you those things. Simply research and practice. And I think the sooner you start those two things, the better off you'll be. This next one's really simple. Yo, Haps, I asked this on your Squadron video and just wanted to hear your thoughts. Do you think they might ever make maxing vanilla Grand Company ranks less time-consuming considering all the things currently locked behind it and the possibility of them deciding to lock more content behind it in the future? So I think if they made expert deliveries available sooner, it would definitely make a big change. I think having just done it on a secondary character, that if not for... I guess having reserves for those and having some expert delivery or having some delivery options to at least get some bonus Grand Company seals. For a new player, that 1 to 50, you know, unless you're stopping and doing fates all the time or Grand Company leaves, it's not great. They've already nerfed the Chocobo issuance part of your Grand Company interactions, which is the very first one you get after unlocking it. And I think they could do with maybe lowering the amount of Grand Company seals you actually need to turn in. If not, making features that reward Grand Company seals a little more available in the level 1 to 50 range, especially considering the way the game is played now, with mostly ignoring fates and leaves in order to just kind of rush through everything else. I think they will. I think they will do this. I think they see that if they do add more and more content behind it, which I don't think they'll add too much outside of Squadrons, that they would need this to change. So they probably will. All right, let's go to the next one. Question. Hello to you too, by the way. With Baldesion Arsenal being a thing, do you think that 14 could or should get more public dungeons in the game? Would it make sense to add smaller public dungeons in the regular overworld content? I won't go into detail on my thoughts of implementation, but I do think it's possible and could be a fun shakeup to how you could explore the world, while also providing interesting opportunities for the player base to discover how to gain access, maybe level up or get unique rewards like glamour or minions. So I feel like with public dungeons, I feel like Baldesion Arsenal was the most extreme version they could have tested in the first place. When I think of public dungeons, obviously my brain goes back to 1.0. I think of Sastasha back then, where pretty much any sort of underground area was considered a public dungeon, but there were specifically dungeons where you could just walk down there and there were sometimes bosses up, there was sometimes loot available. And I think those kind of areas are really nice for immersion, or really nice for exploration, like you've named. And that's why Eureka is dubbed exploration content. I have a feeling what we'll see for public dungeons in the future will be smaller scale for the most part, with some larger scale instances like the Baldesion Arsenal. I also think the idea of this really weird way to enter Baldesion Arsenal doesn't survive past this iteration of public dungeons. The whole portal thing with the stabilize, it just didn't work. Maybe if you get a key item and you trade it and your whole party enters, I'm okay with that. What I would like to see, if they do it in more exploration content, if they continue to do public dungeons, Diadem has kind of like a beautiful example of what a public dungeon could and should be. There's an overworld area that has monsters and notorious monsters, and then there's a subterranean area that you can go into. When you fly into it, it takes you off your flying mount, grounds you, and then just add the resurrection debuff on there, and bam, you've got a public dungeon. Maybe you add a little gatekeeper that gives you a buff that actually allows you to enter. Maybe it locks in arena, but it's not marked as a notorious monster, so you can make groups, fight that first boss, and then go into the public dungeon and work from there. I think that's probably the safer way to do it. And it's weird to refer to Diadem, but I think that Eureka has taken enough things about Diadem and improved them that at this point I can at least cite that and say, Eureka, please, or I guess exploration content, please just do it better in the future. I think it's a fine idea. I think Baldesion Arsenal, while it has its flaws, was an overall success for Eureka and for the game as a whole. It's just a matter of making it a bit less convoluted. A lot less convoluted. Alright, here's one that I haven't had in a while. Question. Hello to you too, by the way. What do you think the cancel ultimate that was supposed to be after Alphascape was? I look back at A Realm Reborn, and if it wasn't Crystal Tower, which also reimagined as an 8-man, I actually have a hard time thinking of another one. People have said like the 6 primals, and it's like, that's lame. Because it's supposed to tell a story. That's kind of the whole point of Ultimate. It's an overblown interpretation of our character's actual events. And just, hey, we fought 6 different primals in 6 different times and 6 different... It's like, yeah, it happened. It's a story progression, technically. And some people have said, maybe just throw 3 more bosses on the Ultimate Weapon. But Ultimate Weapon didn't encounter those other 3 bosses, so... I don't really like many of our other options for A Realm Reborn. So if it wasn't going to be Crystal Tower, it had to be something Heavensward related. And then it could have been anything. Alexander, Warring Dryad, somehow fit Thordan or Nidhogg, or, there's so many Diablos, it could have fit so many different ideas. And I think that's why next expansion, I feel like we're almost definitely getting 3, especially because they realized after they had canceled the 1 that there was no way to go back and continue working on the other one. It was too late. So it means they have some work done on another Ultimate, and it's probably the Ultimate we'll actually see in 5.1, I'm assuming. And as such, Alexander seems like the easiest guess. I think Alexander, Warring Triad, and Nidhogg. It's hard to tell because a lot of people have said the Warring Triad and Kefka. In Final Fantasy XIV's lore, those 2 things have nothing to do with one another. So I have a feeling they keep them completely separated. You're not going to take Kefka as a data projection of, of what happens in Sigmascape, and the Warring Triad, which were a legitimate threat on Mericidia during the Allagans' annexing of the continent. They don't match. There's no point for them to go together outside of Final Fantasy VI. And as such, I have a feeling if the Warring Triad are part of another boss, it's probably Thordan. If they don't just do like a giant three-way encounter where you're fighting all three of them at the same time after you beat them all individually. Thordan's entire purpose while he was in Azys Lla was to absorb the power of those primals, of those elder primals. So maybe outside of just, Knights of the Round, because I think Thordan on his own is actually a terribly lame ultimate. We already fight most of the knights in his actual encounter. If we don't fight them for very long, we do fight them. They're not very interesting bosses on their own, and they already mix all of their mechanics in the Thordan's actual fight. I think him on his own is not a good idea. I think maybe him plus the Warring Triad is an okay idea, but then you have to consider Nidhogg. Nidhogg, do we involve Midgardstormer? Do we involve Hraesvelgr? Do we involve Thordan? The Eye of Nidhogg was in Thordan's sword, and then was brought back to Nidhogg, and then do you even have to talk about Shinryu? Because Shinryu is the finale of what happens with Nidhogg's eyes. Again, a little spoilery here, but this is like 2-year-old spoilers at this point. I can't have spoiler warnings forever. So there's so many things there that mish and mash, but that's the wonderful thing. There are so many possibilities out of Heavensward. And then Stormblood, we have obvious ones. Omega being his own is probably the most notable. But man, and then Shinryu, of course, which you already named. So there's a lot of possibilities. And obviously, as time goes on, more possibilities begin opening up. Maybe they do, all the Garlean generals at some point, but then you have to consider Ultima Weapon, because Gaius is technically a part of an Ultima Weapon encounter, and there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things going on. So I'm really curious to see how all of those things pan out. But as you can tell from what I've just said, I don't even know which ones. The Warring Triad's the most basic one that I want to see. I want to see you on Sophia's arena with 2 arenas below you, and Sephiroth hits one side and the meteors from Sophia hit the other, while Zervan is making you fall into the correct, like onto the right side, into the proper seals, like. So, Warring Triad's a big one for me, and that's going to be my answer. Okay, and this is going to be the last question. There are some questions that I skipped over, either because of time constraints or because I've either talked about it enough times at this point, or it's very recent. Yeah, anything I listed at the beginning. So for this one, we have question. Hello to you too, by the way. It's the 3rd time I've done it. You don't actually have to say hello, I'm just busting your balls a little bit. But I always do it. I always say, if nobody even wants to say hello, fine, I'll just hello to you too, by the way. With Stormblood's release, a lot of job kits were simplified. The stated goal was to close the gap between the damage dealt by better players versus those more clueless ones that prompt horror stories. In particular, many damage dealing off global cooldowns and single GCD dots were removed, so apparently Square Enix felt they were a core part of the issue. Scourge, Flaming Arrow, Touch of Death, things like that. 2 years later, has it worked? I guess I don't remember exactly how bad it was or wasn't, but I definitely see plenty of questionable numbers. I got to wondering after today's related question. Is Square Enix likely to count the removal of these skills as success, or could we see a reevaluation with some other categories of skills getting the axe, maybe some of the old ones being deemed harmless and brought back? So first of all, here's one thing I always say about this. You can simplify things as much as you want. It doesn't stop people from just not giving a shit. And it doesn't stop people who are just genuinely not even like trying to do anything. They're just trying to have fun and play the game. They're not trying to think so deeply about where their abilities fit between this and that. And yes, for those of us who it matters to, it's so painful to watch. It's like I was watching somebody play DMC5 and they didn't know how to exceed as Nero, and I'm like, listen, okay, I get it. If you didn't look at it, if you didn't know, if you haven't played it before, I get it. You wouldn't know, you'll figure it out. But oh, do I want you to just hit that max exceed, please? It's like that, you feel that way about the various jobs that are being played. So doesn't matter, you're going to see questionable numbers, is what I'm saying. I think it has worked, but not for the reasons you're listing here. It isn't just to lower the gap, it's to make room for new abilities and new job mechanics. Now, depends on the jobs we're talking about here. I still think there are abilities that are in the game that absolutely need removing, such as One Ilm Punch, that I don't know why they thought it was okay to just leave it like that. There's things they added like Tackle Mastery, which now with Tornado Kick on Monk has been an insanely interesting way to do it. You also just don't need it. You could just make things work differently to achieve the same thing. It's such an odd passive to get, and while it does open up a lot of interesting Tornado Kick rotations, it just wasn't a fun addition addition to Monk. And then I look at some of the things you mentioned being removed, Scourge, Flaming Arrow, Touch of Death. The idea of simplifying jobs, I think, worked. But it just doesn't stop players from having a gap. You can't. Players have different skill levels. That's just the way it is. And no one's an asshole for being better or worse. Or it is how it is, you know? One thing I will say is that Dark Knight's removal of Scourge, it's the only one of those I disagree with, for the sole purpose that Dark Knight only has 2 3-part combos, and you almost never use Power Slash unless you're desperate for Enmity. So you really only have 1. So it's almost like playing a Rage of Halone Paladin, where you press Dark Arts in between like every other skill. So Scourge is the only one that I kind of think they could have left in. But for the most part, all the other ones they got rid of, especially having played Ninja in 3.0. Oh my god, I was so glad to see Mutilate gone. I think the bigger question to ask is, have the new things worked? I'm not a big fan of Ninky. So I know a lot of people who don't like TCJ on Ninja. Job gauges for some jobs are horribly tacked on, don't even need to be there. Lily's coming to mind. Machinist Heat Gauge is very rigid to use. Yeah, you have the just Oath Gauge for 2 abilities, and so some of the abilities are really weird. Warrior made sense, Dark Knight kind of makes sense, but they could do more with it. And I'm curious to see if they do more. Maybe these job gauges they've introduced now in the next expansion, they give them better reasons to exist if they didn't have good reasons before. I think jobs like Monk served them best because it was like, well, I have these resources I'm always tracking anyway. I might as well have a more visual means of tracking them. It makes perfect sense. Doesn't make sense to add the stupid lilies. I'm just saying, it's a waste of time. So, it's 50-50. I think it has worked, but it's only going to work as much as the players allow it to work. Because also as numbers go up, the differences in those numbers is going to go up as well because you got bigger numbers to work with. It's a very loaded question, and despite the fact that my ramblings may not have provided a direct answer, I hope it's direct enough. But anyway, that's the last question I'm going to be taking from the YouTube comment section this week. There were other questions there, and I'm letting you know, I chose not to answer them, either because I've answered them a million times, or they just didn't feel like they were interesting enough for me to answer. So, if you have a question, keep that in mind, and go ask your question under this video in the YouTube comment section below. A little weird capturing the YouTube comment section, but I think we'll be all right for using that in the foreseeable future. Anyway, thank you again to our Patreon sponsors, and again, keep an eye out for some Devil May Cry 5 related stuff on the channel this week, as well as, I was going to say something, and I don't remember what it was. Yeah, is there any coffee left in here? Yeah, there is. Yeah, that didn't help. Anyway, that's going to be it. Just look out for Devil May Cry 5 stuff, I guess. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next video. And until then, take care.